It's 7:43 a.m. in the southern Caribbean Sea, 180 miles off the coast of Venezuela. The USS Harry S. Truman is cutting through deep blue water at 18 knots, her strike group spread across the horizon like a floating steel city, destroyers flanking, a cruiser ahead, the whole formation moving in perfect, practiced silence. The morning sky is clear, the ocean is flat. A few sailors on the flight deck are running drills, others are drinking coffee, watching the sun climb higher over the water. Everything is calm. Then, the radar changes. A single blip appears on the SPY-1 display inside the Combat Information Center. Fast, low, bearing 194, and it isn't slowing down. The radar operator stares at it for exactly 2 seconds before he calls it out. "Unidentified contact, sir. High-performance jet, coming off Venezuelan airspace. No IFF response." On the bridge, the watch officer set down his coffee. It goes cold on the console. He doesn't notice. He leans toward the screen, eyes narrowing. "What have we got?" "Single bogey, speed 490 knots, altitude 800 feet, heading direct for the strike group." The contact wasn't a survey plane. It wasn't a commercial aircraft off course. It wasn't some patrol helicopter running a routine coastal sweep. It was an F-16 Fighting Falcon, a fourth-generation multi-role fighter capable of pulling 9 Gs and carrying everything from air-to-air missiles to precision-guided bombs. The same model the United States had sold to Venezuela decades earlier, back when the relationship between the two countries was something other than what it had become. Now that aircraft was pointed directly at the Truman's flight deck at nearly 500 knots. No radio call made, no flight plan filed with anyone, no warning of any kind. Just speed, altitude, and a heading that left absolutely no room for misreading the intention. Down in the Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer was already on his feet. The SPY-1 radar painted the F-16 in cold, precise detail. Range 62 miles, speed holding, altitude low and steady. The system tracked every centimeter of that aircraft's flight path, feeding the data live to every console in the room. The watch officer studied the screen. His jaw tightened. "Get the skipper down here." And then, before anyone could say another word, the radar picture changed again. Because 2 minutes later, a second contact blinked onto the screen. Same bearing, same altitude, same speed, tight formation, coming from the exact same vector. 2 F-16s, both heading straight for a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered aircraft carrier operating in international waters, both refusing to answer radio hails, both closing the distance at nearly 8 miles per minute. In the Combat Information Center, someone said it quietly. This is not an accident. Nobody disagreed. At 0745 hours, the Truman's flight deck snapped into motion. Yellow shirts moved fast across the deck, waving handlers into position. Jet blast deflectors rose behind the catapults. Fuel lines snapped tight. Deck crews in their color-coded jerseys moved with the kind of precision that only comes from doing something 1,000 times until it stops being a drill and starts being instinct. 2 FA-18F Super Hornets were moved to the bow catapults, wings spread, engines spooling from idle to full military power. The noise on the flight deck went from loud to deafening in under 60 seconds. The launch officer raised his hand, pointed forward, checked left, checked right, then dropped his hand toward the deck. The first Hornet disappeared off the bow in a wall of steam and thunder, afterburners blazing orange against the morning sky, climbing hard and banking south before it was even a quarter mile from the ship. The second followed 4 seconds later, wings rocking as it punched through the jet exhaust of the first, pulling up into a steep climb that pressed the pilot back into his seat at nearly 6 Gs. Their call signs were Raven 1 and Raven 2. Their orders were clean and simple. Intercept the contacts, identify them visually, observe and record.
Do not escalate. Do not lock weapons unless fired upon first. Down in the Combat Information Center, the operations officer watched both Hornet tracks climb on the big board. The range between the F-16s and the carrier was still dropping. 55 miles, 49, 42. Bridge, combat, bogey still closing, still no IFF, still no response on guard frequency. The Truman's captain stepped through the hatch into the CIC, his eyes going immediately to the center console. He studied the screen for a moment, hands clasped behind his back, completely still. Maintain heading, do not alter course or speed. A junior officer glanced up from his console. The captain caught the look. We don't move for noise. We never have. It wasn't stubbornness, it wasn't ego, it was something deeper than both. A U.S. carrier strike group changing course in response to a provocation sends one message above all others, that the provocation worked, that the threshold for changing American behavior at sea is lower than anyone thought. And once that message goes out, it doesn't come back. The captain had been in this Navy for 28 years. He knew exactly what moving meant, so he didn't move. At 07:48 a.m., the Raven 1 reached intercept altitude. What he saw through his canopy would confirm that this was no navigation mistake and no coincidence. At 22,000 feet, the Caribbean stretches out in all directions, blue and endless and completely indifferent to whatever is happening below it. The sun is already bright up here. Raven 1 pushes his throttle forward, closing the gap between himself and the two radar returns ahead of him. His RWR is clean, no radar emissions painting him from either aircraft. Not yet. Then he sees them. Two F-16s, dark gray against the lighter gray of the lower sky, flying close, formation tight, noses angled down in a shallow dive that is pointed with unmistakable precision toward the Truman far below. Raven 1 keys his radio. Truman Control, Raven 1, Tally 2, visual on both bandits, formation tight, they are in a descending profile, noses towards the ship. Copy, Raven 1. Maintain shadow. Do not engage. Inside the Truman CIC, every console was tracking it in real time. The lights in the Combat Information Center would dim as always. The air conditioning hummed. Radar scopes painted the whole sky in precise digital detail. Every operator at every console was watching the same thing, a red track icon descending steadily toward the blue diamond that represented the Truman. Bridge, combat, bogey 1 now at 4,200 feet, speed 510 knots, range 11 miles. The captain stepped closer to the central display. His eyes tracked the descending icon. His expression didn't change. CWAS to warm standby, manual mode, do not engage without my direct order.
On the flight deck above them, the Phalanx close-in weapon system rotated smoothly on its mount without a sound, its 6-barrel 20mm Gatling cannon elevating toward the southern sky. The system's radar was already tracking the incoming F-16 with the kind of mechanical precision that human reflexes cannot match. At this range, with a target moving at 510 knots, the Phalanx could calculate, track, acquire, and fire before a human operator finished blinking. The only thing standing between that trigger and the Venezuelan jet was a single spoken word from one man. Stand by. The CIC fell into a silence that had texture to it. You could feel it pressing against the walls. Every person in that room was doing the same math in their head. Range, speed, time to impact. Every person in that room knew exactly how many seconds were left before this situation stopped being a provocation and became something that had a different name entirely. Range 8 miles, altitude 2,800 feet, still closing. The captain didn't move. Range 6 miles.
Outside, two of the Truman's escort destroyers tightened their screening positions, moving to put themselves between the threat and the carrier. Their own weapons systems were live. Their own crews were at battle stations. The whole strike group was breathing together now. One organism. Every sensor pointed south. Range 4 miles. Altitude dropping fast, 1,600 feet. Then the lead F-16 leveled out. Not much, just enough. The nose came up 3 degrees. The dive flattened into a screaming low-altitude run. The aircraft now pointed directly at the Truman's bow at 1,200 feet above the water. Still way too low, still way too fast, still way too close. It crossed over the escort destroyer Mason's bow first. The shockwave from its passage hit the ship's superstructure like a physical blow, rattling equipment and knocking a junior sailor off balance on the bridge wing. The sound that followed was somewhere between a thunderclap and an explosion. Then the F-16 was over the Truman. 1,200 feet, full afterburner, 510 knots. The entire flight deck shook. Sailors grabbed stanchions and equipment. The jet exhaust left a shimmer in the air above the deck that lasted for 3 full seconds after the aircraft was already gone. In the CIC, the radar showed the F-16 pulling up hard on the far side of the carrier, climbing back toward altitude. Raven 1 was right behind it the whole way. Truman Control, pass complete. Bandit 1 has crossed the bow. No weapons deployment, no targeting activity. Recording complete. Copy, Raven 1. Good work. Continue shadow. The second F-16 made the same pass 40 seconds later. Same altitude, same speed, same shockwave across the flight deck. The message was identical both times. We can reach you. We can come this close. What are you going to do about it? The Truman's answer was the same both times. Nothing. At 0754 hours, the 2 F-16s began climbing. Their run was over. Both jets pulled up into steep climbing turns, banking west toward the Venezuelan mainland. The afterburner glow faded against the brightening sky. Raven 1 kept his bracket position, shadowing them as they climbed, watching their every move on his helmet display. For 30 seconds, it looked exactly like it was over. Then Raven 1's radar warning receiver lit up. A single tone, sharp, unmistakable. Fire control radar, targeting pulse. One of the F-16s had just activated its AN-APG-68 fire control radar and painted the Truman with a targeting lock. Not a navigation scan, not an accidental emission spike, a deliberate, precise, sustained targeting pulse of the kind that precedes weapons release. The electronic equivalent of putting a dun sight on someone's chest and letting them see the laser dot. Raven 1's voice stayed flat. Truman Control, be advised. Radar warning receiver active. We have been painted by Bandit 2. Fire control radar, single targeting pulse. The CIC went completely silent. Every operator at every console heard it. Every person in that room understood what it meant. A targeting radar lock from a fighter aircraft is not an accidental occurrence. It is not something that happens by mistake. It is a message with only one possible translation. I have you, I can kill you, and I want you to know it. The captain's voice came over the net without hesitation. Log the pulse. Timestamp it. No response required. Maintain posture. All stations hold. No evasive maneuver. No flares. No counterlock from the Hornets. No course change. No escalation of any kind. Just documentation, discipline, and silence. Because here's the thing about gray zone encounters at sea that most people never understand. The targeting radar pulse was bait. It was designed specifically to provoke a response that Venezuela could then point to as American aggression. A counterlock from the Hornets, a course change from the carrier, an activation of the phalanx targeting system on the ship's sensors. Any of those reactions becomes footage. Any of those reactions becomes a diplomatic incident. accident. Any of those reactions hands Venezuela exactly the narrative it came out here to collect. The captain understood this. Every person in that CIC understood this. So they gave Venezuela nothing. The F-16s continued climbing. The targeting radar pulse lasted 4 seconds and then went silent. Both jets crossed back into Venezuelan airspace 11 minutes later and vanished from the Truman's radar entirely. The Caribbean went quiet again. By 0900 hours, the full recorded package, radar tracks, FLIR footage from the Hornets, communications logs, RWR data, was already transmitted to 5th Fleet headquarters. Within 2 hours, it was on desks inside the Pentagon. By midday, analysts in 3 different buildings were reviewing the same footage frame by frame. What they confirmed was what the Truman's crew already knew. This was not an unplanned patrol that wandered too close. The formation flight, the coordinated dive profiles, the timing of the targeting radar pulse on the withdrawal, all of it pointed to a deliberate, rehearsed operation with specific objectives. Test the carrier's response time, measure the threshold for a counterlock, probe the rules of engagement, collect sensor data on the strike group's electronic emissions under pressure. None of it worked. The Hornets launched in under 3 minutes. The carrier never altered course. The weapon systems went to standby, but never to active. The targeting radar pulse was logged and ignored. Venezuela got nothing it came for, except footage of its own jets running passes on a carrier that paid it no meaningful attention. For naval strategists, none of this was surprising. These kinds of gray zone encounters at sea have been a feature of maritime competition for decades. Russia does it in the North Sea, China does it in the South China Sea, Iran does it in the Strait of Hormuz. The playbook is always the same. Push until something pushes back, then use the pushback as evidence of aggression, then push again from a position of manufactured victimhood. The counter to it is always the same, too. Don't push back. Document everything. Hold the line without giving the other side a single frame of footage they can use. The USS Harry Truman executed that counter perfectly. Venezuelan state media ran the story differently, of course. Grainy cockpit footage of the F-16s making their passes appeared on national television within hours, accompanied by a voiceover declaring that the Bolivarian Air Force had successfully challenged illegal American naval presence in Venezuelan waters and forced the carrier to alter its course. The Truman never altered its course. Not once. The Navy released its own track data. The carrier's position before and after the encounter was identical. Same heading, same speed, 20 knots north-northwest, exactly where it had been before the first F-16 appeared on radar. The world could see both sets of data and decide for itself what the truth was. The truth was simple. A carrier battle group was deliberately provoked by a nation trying to make a political point at sea. The carrier absorbed that provocation without flinching, without escalating, and without giving the other side anything to work with. The weapons stayed cold, the course held, and when it was over, the only story the Truman had to tell was one of complete, absolute, unshakable composure under pressure. That is not a small thing. That, in many ways, is the hardest thing. Because the easy call in that CIC at the moment the targeting radar lit up was to authorize a counterlock, to let those F-16s paint those Hornets right back, to give Venezuela the escalation it was looking for and deal with the consequences afterwards. Every instinct, every training reflex in that room was pulling toward the same response. The captain chose differently. Anyone can pull a trigger. Knowing when not to is what separates a navy from a mob with ships. The USS Harry Truman represents the absolute cutting edge of American naval power.
Electromagnetic catapults, dual-band radar, a command network that links every sensor in the strike group into a single real-time tactical picture. She carries aircraft that can strike targets 1,000 miles away with precision measured in meters. She projects force across entire regions just by existing. But on this morning, her most powerful weapon was the judgment of one man at a central console in a dim room with glowing screens, and the silence he chose to keep. So here's the question I want to leave you with, my friends. If you were in that combat information center, if you were the one watching that F-16 dive toward your ship on the radar screen, if you were the one who heard that targeting radar tone light up your RWR, and if you had the authority to authorize the phalanx and authorize a counterlock from the Hornets, would you hold the order, or would you make the call? Think about what happens downstream from each decision. Think about what the footage looks like from the other side. Think about what message each choice sends to every other Navy watching this encounter play out. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know where you draw that line. Because there is no obviously correct answer, and the fact that there isn't is exactly what makes these encounters so dangerous. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Hit like if this kept you locked in from the first second. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Real encounters, real stakes, real decisions made under pressure at sea. And share this video with someone who still thinks aircraft carriers are just oversized targets. Because the USS Harry Truman just proved something out there in the Southern Caribbean that morning. Power isn't about how fast you can pull the trigger. It's about having the discipline to decide whether you should. The ocean doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It never has. It belongs to the one with the steadiest hand.